I'm Nora Bennett, 31 years old, and by the time my mother told me to get out of my own house, I had already replaced the furnace twice, rebuilt the back steps, and spent 6 winters keeping that old brick place standing while everyone else treated it like a family memory with a roof. The strangest part is that when she screamed, "You've got one day, pack up! This house is your brother's now," I didn't feel shock first. I felt recognition, like some locked door inside me had finally swung open. I was standing there with a serving spoon in my hand, staring at a table I had set, food I had paid for, walls I had patched, and people who had somehow convinced themselves I was temporary in the only place I had been holding together for years. My father wouldn't look at me. My brother leaned back like he was waiting for me to make a scene big enough to justify what they had already decided. I didn't give them that satisfaction. I set the spoon down, folded my napkin, and looked past all three of them toward the hallway where the deed folder sat in a firebox they thought only my father knew about. If I had argued, they would have called me dramatic. If I had cried, they would have called me unstable. So I did the one thing none of them expected. I went quiet, because quiet is dangerous when the wrong person mistakes it for defeat. I walked upstairs, opened my closet, pulled out the go bag I keep for home inspection emergencies, and started making a list instead of packing. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The second my bedroom door clicked shut, I stopped being their daughter in crisis and became an investigator in my own life. I didn't pace. I didn't sob. I took photographs. First, the cracked plaster over the dining room arch I had repaired last spring. Then the water heater invoice in my name. Then the bundle of contractor receipts I kept in a labeled accordion file because no one remembers your labor until you document it. After that, I did something that still makes me smile when I think about it. I walked back downstairs while they were still drinking coffee, like the execution had already happened, stood in the hallway, and took a picture of the family portrait hanging beside the staircase, the one where I was 16, holding the paintbrush because even then I was the one fixing what everyone else ignored. I sent it to my best friend, Tessa Monroe, with one caption. Tonight, my family erased 31 years of my life in one sentence. Screenshot this in case they try to rewrite history. 2 minutes later, Tessa replied, "Don't move a single box. I'm coming." While I waited, I checked social media, and that was when the humiliation stopped being private. My mother had already posted a smiling photo of the front porch with the caption, "So proud that our son is finally taking over the family home. Full circle moment." My stomach didn't drop, it hardened. They had not only pushed me out, they had announced it to the world before I had even left the table. When Tessa arrived, she didn't ask whether I was okay. She saw my face, saw the open tabs on my laptop, saw the screenshot of my mother's post, and said, "Tell me what they forgot you know." That question changed the whole night, because I knew property records. I knew permit histories. I knew exactly how desperate people hide money problems inside family language. I pulled the county auditor site up, typed in the parcel number, and found something that made the room go cold. A recent lien notice. Not large enough to explain everything, but enough to prove this wasn't some sentimental handoff between parents and son. This house was under pressure. That meant one of two things. Either they were lying to me about ownership, or they had used me as a cushion while planning to hand the asset to him anyway. Tell me honestly, would you check whether your own family had been using your name, your labor, or your credit as collateral while smiling in your face at dinner? Tessa drove us across town just before midnight to meet the only person she trusted to read the financial smoke before the fire reached the walls. His name was Grant Holloway, and the reason she trusted him was ugly enough to make me listen without interrupting. Years earlier, Grant's older sister had forged his signature on a business line of credit so she could keep her boutique alive for 6 more months. By the time he found out, his credit score had collapsed, his apartment application had been denied, and his own parents had begged him not to blow up the family by reporting it. He didn't tell me that story for sympathy. He told it so I would understand something most people never do until it's too late. Betrayal inside a family doesn't arrive looking like betrayal. It arrives wrapped in softer words. Temporary. Necessary. We were going to tell you. Don't make this worse than it is. Grant now worked in fraud resolution for a regional bank and sometimes consulted with litigation attorneys when family money cases turned ugly. The minute he saw the lien screenshot, my repair receipts, the property records, and my mother's smug porch post, his whole expression changed. He didn't waste time telling me to breathe or calm down. He asked for my driver's license, a few past documents with my real signature, and permission to run a soft identity check. Then he opened 3 databases at once and started pulling on threads. 10 minutes later, he found the thing that made my ears ring. A home equity loan for $250,000, opened 8 months earlier, attached to documents carrying a version of my signature that looked convincing from a distance, and suspicious the second you studied the pressure, angle, and spacing. The interest rate was 18.1%, the kind of rate that screams panic, not planning. Worse, the delinquency timeline suggested the property could be pushed into accelerated enforcement in about 90 days if the lender decided to move fast. That's not normal, Grant said, leaning back in his chair. This wasn't smart borrowing. This was a last door left open situation. Either they were desperate, reckless, or convinced the person whose name was on it would never challenge them. I stared at the screen, and suddenly every fake explanation I had been fed at that dinner burned away. This wasn't about helping my brother settle down. This wasn't a loving transfer of the family home. They had strapped a financial bomb beneath the floorboards and attached my identity to the timer. Grant kept digging. He found the loan packet had been routed through a broker known for high-risk, quick-close products. The contact address tied to the application listed the house itself, but the phone number was not mine. It belonged to my father. One of the supporting income documents referenced maintenance payments that did not match my actual bank activity. Then came the detail that made Tessa swear under her breath. The application described me as a coordinating household owner, a vague phrase meant to sound official while hiding the fact that I had likely never consented. They needed a cleaner borrower, Grant said. Better credit, stable records, someone already associated with the property. You were the perfect target because you were both useful and close enough to pressure emotionally. That sentence hit harder than the dollar amount. Not because I didn't know my family could be selfish, but because I realized how deliberately they had chosen me. Not random. Not impulsive, selected. Tessa asked the question I couldn't force past my teeth. Can they lose the house? Grant nodded once. If she does nothing? Yes. If the lender gets aggressive, yes. And if the fraud stands unchallenged, they may have been counting on blaming the fallout on her anyway. He printed the file summary, highlighted inconsistencies in the signatures, circled the communication entries linked to my father's number, and handed me a yellow legal pad. Start a timeline, he said. Every repair, every payment, every conversation you remember. Dates matter. People lie best in generalities. So I started writing. Furnace replacement, basement seepage repair, emergency plumber after the freeze, utility transfers, insurance calls, porch stabilization. Each line reminded me of the same brutal truth. I had not merely lived in that house. I had preserved it while they built a trap around me. Before we left, Grant gave me the name of a litigator he trusted and said something I still hear in my head whenever someone says, "But their family." He said, "People think fraud is about money. Most of the time, it's about permission. Someone in your family decided your consent wasn't necessary because they believed access to you was the same thing as ownership of you. I walked out of his office after midnight feeling strangely steady. The grief was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer grief over what they had done. It was grief over finally understanding who they had always been. So tell me, what would you call it if the people who raised you decided they could turn you into a debtor with one forged signature and still expect you to sit at the same dinner table and smile? By morning, I had slept maybe 43 minutes, but exhaustion can be useful when it burns fear out of your system. I showered, dressed in the plainest clothes I owned, tied my hair back, and went downstairs with a folder thick enough to make denial look stupid. At 10 o'clock, I asked my parents to meet me in the kitchen. I chose the kitchen on purpose. That room had always been their stage set for family talks, the place where truth got softened with coffee and casseroles until it barely resembled itself. I was done letting that room belong to them. When they sat down, I didn't pace or perform. I laid three things on the table in a straight line: the line notice, the loan summary, and a side-by-side comparison of my real signature against the forged one. Then I added a fourth item: copies of repair invoices and utility statements showing how long I had been carrying the property in practical terms, while they spoke about it like an heirloom they could hand to my brother whenever it suited them. My father sat down too fast, like his knees had forgotten how to lock. My mother reacted first, but not with honesty. "Nora, this looks worse than it is." I slid my phone across the table, already open to her porch post celebrating my brother's takeover. "No," I said. "That looks exactly like what it is." She reached for the phone like she could pull the evidence back into privacy. I moved it out of reach. My father finally spoke, and even then he tried to sound administrative, as if tone alone could turn fraud into a misunderstanding. We were going to explain once things were settled. Settled? I asked. With whose house? With whose credit? With whose name? With whose future? He had no answer, so he did what men like him do when facts corner them. He tried indignation. He said I was overreacting, that families help each other, that I was being cold. Cold. That word almost made me laugh. Then my brother walked in late with coffee in his hand, still wearing the expression of someone who thought he was entering an ordinary morning. The second he saw the papers, something in his face tightened. He knew. Maybe not every line item, maybe not every forged detail, but enough. I turned to him and asked the simplest question in the room. "How long?" He froze just long enough to answer me without words. My mother started crying, but not the kind that comes from guilt. The kind that comes from losing control of the story. She said they had only taken the loan because my father's warehouse investment had collapsed and my brother's business debts were piling up. She said it was supposed to be temporary, that once my brother recovered, everything would be sorted out properly. Sorted out? I repeated. You posted online that the house was his while the debt sat in my name. That isn't sorting something out. That's burying me under it. My father pushed back from the table so hard the chair legs scraped the tile. He pointed at the wall like the house itself would testify on his behalf. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you talk to us?" There it was, the old family weapon. Gratitude as a leash. As if food in childhood meant legal access to my signature in adulthood. I reached into the folder and placed one more sheet down between us. An occupancy and expense timeline showing that I had been the primary resident maintaining the house, covering utilities, managing contractors, and funding major repairs for years. "If you want to talk about what was done," I said, "let's start with what I did to keep this place from rotting while you mortgaged it behind my back." That was the moment the energy shifted. My mother actually leaned back like the table had become dangerous. My father stopped pointing. My brother set his coffee down without drinking it. I could see all three of them realizing the same thing at once. I had not come downstairs to beg. I had come downstairs prepared. Then I delivered the sentence Grant had told me to use only once, and only if I meant it. My attorney has copies of everything. If anyone touches my room, my files, or a single fixture in this house, the fraud complaint gets filed before lunch. Silence hit the room so hard it felt physical. My mother whispered, "You would really do that to your own family?" I looked at her and thought about the forged signature, the predatory rate, the smug social media post, the dinner announcement, the way my brother had waited for me to explode so they could call me unstable. "No," I said. "You already did this to your family. I'm the only one here telling the truth about it." My brother finally tried to salvage something. He said I was making this uglier than it needed to be, that no one wanted to hurt me, that the plan had been to refinance later. "With what money?" I asked. "Your failed brewery money? Dad's warehouse fantasy? Mom's Facebook blessings?" He looked away. My father's face went gray. My mother put one hand to her chest like she might faint, but even then I couldn't trust the gesture. In families like mine, weakness was often just another tactic to redirect accountability. I gathered the papers back into the folder, stood up, and told them all to be in the living room at 7 that evening if they wanted one final chance to tell the truth before attorneys, lenders, and court filings took the choice away from them. Then I walked out of the kitchen, not because I was afraid of what came next, but because I finally understood something crucial. Confrontation is strongest when you leave before liars find a new version. Tell me honestly, does family love mean anything at all once money enters the room and the people closest to you decide your silence is more convenient than your rights? I could have gone straight to court from there, but I wanted one thing first. Not reconciliation, not an apology, not even closure. I wanted a record so clean and undeniable that no one, relative, neighbor, lender, judge, church friend, or social media spectator, could later pretend this had been one big emotional misunderstanding. So I told them all to be in the living room at 7 that evening. My brother tried to refuse until I said, "Then explain the forged loan to a judge without hearing the last chance version first." He showed up. So did my parents. Tessa sat beside me on the sofa, calm and silent, in the way only a real friend can be when she knows her presence matters more than speeches. Grant waited outside in my car with a sealed evidence folder and copies of every document in case anyone got bold, destructive, or suddenly forgetful. I had spent the afternoon building something my family would never forget. Not a slideshow, not a sentimental montage, a timeline. A prosecution-grade family history stripped of every soft lie they had been hiding behind. I used the old short-throw projector my father hadn't touched in years and aimed it at the blank wall above the mantel. The first slide was a photo of the house from 12 years ago. Collapsed gutter, rotting porch rail, water damage blooming under the upstairs window like bruises. Then came the next slide. My inspection notes from the first year I started handling repairs, then contractor invoices, then utility statements in my name, then dated photos of the electrical panel replacement, basement drainage correction, foundation crack sealing, restored storm windows, furnace servicing, emergency plumbing during the freeze, and the roof patch after the spring windstorm. I did not rush. I let each image sit long enough to become undeniable. By the fifth slide, it was already obvious this house had not been lovingly preserved by the family. It had been held together by one daughter everyone found convenient to overlook. Then the text messages appeared. My mother thanking me for saving the place again. My father asking me to meet the electrician because he was busy. My brother joking that he'd only move back if the house came free and clear with no headaches. He gave that line in writing, which was almost generous. My mother started wringing her hands. My father stared at the floor. My brother crossed his arms. That old posture of defensive arrogance he had probably been practicing since high school. I moved to the next section. Public humiliation. Up came the screenshot of my mother's post announcing that her son was finally taking over the family home. Then comments from neighbors congratulating him. Then my unanswered message asking why she would post that before even speaking to me privately. I was excited, she whispered. No, I answered without raising my voice. You were confident I'd stay quiet. But the moment that truly broke the room came next. A voice memo. Not illegally obtained, not edited, not manipulated. Just a recording from 2 weeks earlier when my brother and mother had been talking in the mudroom while I was fixing the dryer outlet, and neither of them remembered I was close enough to hear everything. His voice filled the room, casual and cruel in that uniquely entitled way selfish people often sound when they think no one important is listening. Nora doesn't need to know. She'll panic and make it harder. Just get her out before the bank starts sending anything official. Nobody moved for about 2 full seconds after it ended. My mother covered her mouth. My father muttered my brother's name like it had become something poisonous. My brother stood up fast, then sat back down when he realized leaving would look exactly like what it was. Guilt trying to exit the frame. I was trying to avoid chaos, he said. That excuse might have worked on someone who still needed his approval. It did not work on me. No, I said. You were trying to outsource consequences. You were fine with chaos as long as it landed on me first. Tessa didn't say a word, but I could feel her beside me like reinforcement. My brother looked at my parents, hoping one of them would intervene, soften, redirect, rescue him. That was the tragic thing about people who spend their whole lives being protected. They mistake delayed consequences for innocence. When no one saved him, he started talking too much. He admitted he knew about the loan from the beginning. He admitted my father had been spiraling after the warehouse investment collapsed. He admitted they needed a cleaner credit profile to get the lender to move. He admitted they thought using my name was temporary because once the house was sold or refinanced, the paperwork would disappear and I would never need to know how close everything had come to disaster. He even said, unbelievably, that they assumed I would understand eventually because I was always the practical one. That sentence changed something final inside me. Practical. That was the word they had hidden behind all these years. It meant dependable when they needed help, invisible when they wanted praise, and exploitable when they needed a sacrifice. I clicked to the final series of slides, projected excerpts of the loan documents, signature inconsistencies marked in red, contact numbers tied to my father, and a summary sheet prepared by Grant showing exactly who benefited from the debt and exactly who carried the legal exposure. Then I placed a printed acknowledgement on the coffee table. It gave them one final option: admit the loan had been executed without my informed consent. Withdraw any claim that my brother had a present ownership interest in the house, and agree that from this point forward, all communication would go through counsel. My father reached for a pen first. My mother grabbed his wrist and started crying harder, saying I was destroying the family over paperwork. I looked right at her and said, "You keep calling it paperwork because if you call it fraud, you'd have to admit what you did." My brother refused to sign until Grant came in from the driveway, set the lender contact sheet and draft complaint on the coffee table, and explained in a calm, professional voice what document fraud, identity misuse, civil damages, injunctive relief, and potential referral consequences actually look like once they leave the living room and enter a courtroom. Fear entered the room honestly for the first time then. Real fear. Not outrage. Not wounded parent theater. The kind of fear that comes when people realize the private language they use to control you no longer works, because the next audience will be judges, clerks, lenders, and public records. My father finally signed. My mother did not. My brother absolutely refused. That refusal ended the evening. I collected the papers, shut the projector off, and told them all that by the next morning this would either be a legal matter with a chance at limited dignity or a public one with none. Then I went upstairs and locked my bedroom door for the last time, not as a frightened daughter, but as the lawful target of a fraud scheme preparing her next move. So tell me, could you forgive a brother who knew you were being used as the shield for his failures and stayed silent because your ruin bought him time? The court process was not quick, and that is exactly why it felt satisfying. Revenge that lands in 10 minutes feels fake. Consequences that build, document by document, hearing by hearing, feel like gravity. My attorney filed for declaratory relief on the forged loan, civil fraud damages, reimbursement for documented property improvements, and injunctive protection regarding occupancy and interference with the house. The lender, once confronted with Grant's signature analysis and the chain of supporting evidence, moved fast to protect itself. Subpoenas went out. Metadata came back. The forged signature packet had been assembled using a scanned signature lifted from an old insurance authorization. My father claimed he didn't understand the legal forms he signed. My mother claimed she was just trying to keep peace. My brother tried to paint himself as a bystander until the voicemail and message records buried that defense alive. In court, the judge was not interested in their family mythology. He was interested in documents, timelines, signatures, and who benefited. When my attorney presented 12 years of receipts proving I had paid for essential repairs that preserved the property's value, roof stabilization, electrical upgrades, drainage corrections, window restoration, foundation crack sealing, the courtroom got very quiet. The judge ruled that the loan obligation tied to my name was void, as to me due to fraud, ordered the defendants to indemnify me against any related collection efforts, and, this was the part my family never saw coming, awarded me $150,000 in compensatory damages tied to documented expenditures, reputational harm, and the financial disruption caused by the fraudulent encumbrance. The court also entered a 5-year no-interference order preventing my brother from entering, representing authority over, or attempting to dispose of the property without explicit written permission. My parents were allowed to petition for limited access to retrieve personal effects, but only under structured conditions. The judge's closing remarks were colder than anything I could have said. Family status is not a license to appropriate identity, property rights, or financial consent. Outside court, consequences started falling like bricks. My parents had to sell my father's truck and my mother's SUV to satisfy immediate legal obligations and settlement pressure from the lender. Their church friends, neighbors, and half the county heard about the case once the local business journal summarized the fraud ruling because my father's failed warehouse investment had involved community money. My brother lost the operations job he had barely managed to get because employers are strangely uneasy about someone connected to forged documents and civil fraud findings. He moved into a 1-bedroom rental 40 minutes away, far from the porch he had been smiling over online. My mother left me 3 voicemails in 1 week saying the punishment had become too harsh. I deleted everyone. Harsh was being told to leave the house I kept alive while my name was tied to a $250,000 trap. Court was just the translation. A month after the ruling, I stood alone in the front room holding the only thing in that house I had not touched during the whole fight. An old framed needlepoint my grandmother made before she died. It showed a little red house with a crooked fence and the words, "Bless this home," stitched underneath in thread so faded it looked almost gray. I had hated it for years because it felt like decorative guilt, one more object demanding reverence for a place that had asked everything from me. But that afternoon I took it down, clean the glass, and set it on the mantel beside a new piece I had commissioned for myself from a local mixed media artist. A torn blueprint of the house stitched back together with one thin red line running through every damaged section. That line didn't mean reunion, it meant continuity, survival. The truth I had been trying to learn my whole life finally looked simple when it was hanging in front of me. Family is not the group photograph on the staircase. Family is not the people who claim first rights to your sacrifice because you share a last name. Family is the people who stay honest when honesty costs them something. Tessa stayed. Grant stayed. My attorney stayed. Even the neighbors I had barely known before this mess stayed in small, ordinary ways, dropping off casseroles during hearings, forwarding screenshots, offering witness statements about who had maintained the property all these years. My blood relatives had spent years teaching me that loyalty meant endurance. They were wrong. Loyalty without respect is captivity with better branding. I ended up converting the upstairs bedroom I once hidden into a consultation office for first-time homeowners and women dealing with property intimidation after divorce, inheritance disputes, or family pressure. Turns out a licensed home inspector with a forged loan case on the public record becomes very convincing when she tells frightened people to read every page before they sign and to believe the knot in their stomach when a story doesn't match the paperwork. So here is the lesson I want to leave with you. Do not let blood ties become the weapon that separates you from your own dignity. If the people closest to you demand your silence in exchange for belonging, they are not protecting the family, they are protecting the lie. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is cut the toxic cord, even while your hands are shaking, because self-respect is the first real foundation any home needs. And if you're wondering whether I ever spoke to my mother again, the answer is yes. Once. She stood on the sidewalk 6 weeks later and asked if we could start over. I told her the truth. We can start with accountability. After that, we'll see whether anything else deserves to live. Then I closed the door, not in anger, but in peace. So now I want to ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect you? Would you choose forgiveness, or would you choose freedom? Comment 1 if you've ever stood up for yourself like this, and comment 2 if you're still scared, but know it's time. I read every comment and I pay special attention to the brave ones.